Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in Christ, I want to start by asking you a question that I believe resonates deeply with each of us today. How many times have you felt as though the weight of your circumstances was more than you could bear? How many times have you questioned, "Why me, Lord?" or wondered if you were truly capable of withstanding the trials that life had thrust upon you? What if I told you that every challenge, every trial, every test you've faced has not been a random occurrence, but a divine selection, an opportunity to prove your worth and to align yourself with God's purpose for your life? What if I told you that without even knowing it, you have passed the test that has been set before you by the Creator Himself? The reality is, you are here today, standing firm, standing strong, because God has already been preparing you for the blessing that is about to unfold. Let's dive deeper into this powerful truth. Sometimes in life we find ourselves walking through valleys of difficulty, and we don't realize that we are actually in the midst of a test. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, challenges that feel insurmountable at times, leaving us asking questions that seem to have no answers. We wonder, why am I facing this? What did I do to deserve this? Will this ever end? But the reality is that God's tests are not always immediately obvious to us. They do not come with a warning sign or a flashing red light telling us, "You are being tested right now." No, God's tests often come in the form of trials and obstacles that seem random or even unfair. In the midst of these difficulties, we might feel overwhelmed, wondering if we can even bear the burden any longer. Yet, it is in these very moments that we are being shaped for greatness. It is in these trials that God is molding us, refining us, and preparing us for something greater than we could have imagined. We often don't recognize that we are being tested until we look back on our journey and see how each step, each challenge, has led us to the place where we stand today. The tests that we face in life are not just random occurrences, nor are they meant to break us. They are divine appointments, carefully orchestrated by God to prepare us for His purpose. The trials that seem so painful in the moment are the very tools that God uses to develop the character, strength, and faith needed for the calling He has placed on our lives. God does not waste anything. He uses every experience, every hardship, and every moment of struggle to refine us. And it is through this refining process that we become the people He has destined us to be. The key to understanding this is that the test is not always about the circumstances themselves. It's about how we respond to them. How we respond when life feels like it's crumbling around us reveals the depth of our faith and trust in God. Will we give up when things get hard? Will we let our circumstances define us? Or will we stand firm, knowing that God is using this moment to strengthen us? Knowing that He is with us in the fire and that He will never leave us or forsake us. When we go through tests, we often think of them as isolated events, something that happens for a season and then is over. But the truth is, the test is a part of a larger journey that God is taking us on. It's a journey of growth, transformation, and preparation for the blessings that He has promised us. The challenges we face today are not the end of the story. They are simply part of the process that God is using to bring us into the fullness of His plan for our lives. Take, for example, the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. After God delivered them from slavery in Egypt, they found themselves in a barren desert, seemingly abandoned and forgotten. The journey should have taken them just a few weeks, yet they wandered for 40 years. And during that time they faced numerous hardships, hunger, thirst, attacks from enemies, and the constant threat of death. Yet, in the midst of all that struggle, God was testing them. He was testing their faith, their obedience, and their trust in His provision. The Israelites didn't understand why they were in the wilderness for so long. They complained, they doubted, and they even wished they had never left Egypt. But what they didn't realize was that the wilderness was not meant to destroy them. It was meant to prepare them. It was meant to show them that their reliance was not on their own strength, but on the provision and power of God. God wanted to take them from a place of bondage to a place of blessing, but He had to prepare them to possess the promised land. The wilderness was where they learned to trust God for their daily needs. It was where they learned to depend on His provision for food, water, and shelter. It was where they learned that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with their own desires. The trials they faced in the wilderness were not punishments. They were part of God's process of refining them, teaching them to rely on Him and trust in His faithfulness. In our own lives, we often find ourselves in wilderness seasons, seasons where everything seems uncertain, and we wonder when or if things will ever get better. But I encourage you today to see these seasons through a different lens. These wilderness experiences are not signs of God's abandonment. They are signs of His preparation. God is preparing you for something greater, something far beyond what you can imagine. He is refining your faith, teaching you patience, and strengthening your trust in His ability to provide and deliver you. What we must understand is that God doesn't just test us to see if we will pass or fail. He tests us to develop the character that will sustain the blessing He has in store. We must go through the fire to be purified, to be made stronger, and to be equipped for the responsibilities that come with the blessing. If we were to receive the blessings of God without first being tested and refined, we would not be able to handle them. The very things that we pray for, success, influence, wealth, or promotion, can become stumbling blocks if we are not prepared to manage them with wisdom, humility, and integrity. That is why God allows us to go through tests. They are not designed to destroy us, but to strengthen us. They are opportunities for us to demonstrate our faithfulness, to trust God even when the path ahead seems unclear, and to prove that we will rely on Him and not on our own abilities. It is through these tests that we are made ready for the next level of blessing that God is preparing for us. Sometimes it's not until after the test that we can look back and see how much we have grown. We may not realize the lessons we've learned, the strength we've gained, or the faith we've developed until we find ourselves in a new season, facing a new challenge. But when we look back, we will see that the test was not just about enduring hardship, it was about becoming the person God created us to be. I believe that many of you who are listening today have already passed tests that you didn't even realize you were taking. You've faced hardships, struggles, and challenges, and you've come through them stronger, wiser, and more resilient than you were before. You may not have known it at the time, but God has been testing you, refining you, and preparing you for the blessings that are about to unfold in your life. The trials you've faced have shaped you into the person you are today, and they have positioned you for the greatness that God has in store. I want to encourage you to embrace this truth. Every test, every trial, every challenge you face is an opportunity for growth and preparation. God is not punishing you, He is preparing you. And when you pass the test, you will find yourself standing in the very place where your blessings are waiting. The breakthrough, the promotion, the miracle, the provision. It's all coming. But first, God had to make sure that you were ready to handle it. And now that you've passed the test, you are positioned to receive the blessing that God has promised. So as you continue on your journey, remember that you are not alone in your struggles. God is with you every step of the way. And when you feel like giving up, when you feel like the test is too much to bear, remember that God is refining you for something greater. You have passed the test, and now the blessing is on its way. Keep your faith, keep pressing forward, and get ready to step into the fullness of the promise that God has for you. The best is yet to come. The blessing is in the process, but it is also in the waiting. Waiting is one of the most challenging aspects of the journey that we must face. It is easy to lose sight of God's plan when we are in the midst of waiting. In fact, many of us struggle with patience because we live in a world that is designed for instant gratification. Everything we want is just a click or a phone call away. Whether it's fast food, online shopping, or even communication, the expectation is that things should happen quickly. But when it comes to God's timing, the pace is often different from what we expect. God's process of blessing us doesn't happen in an instant. It is a journey, a series of steps that require time, effort, and above all, patience. It's in the waiting that God is doing His most powerful work. He is shaping us, refining our character, and preparing us to steward the blessings that He has in store for us. This is difficult for us to understand because our natural inclination is to want things right away. We want the breakthrough, the success, the prosperity, and we want it now. But what we fail to realize is that if we receive the blessing too soon, we may not be equipped to handle it. If we get the promotion, the relationship, or the opportunity before we are truly ready, it could become a stumbling block rather than a stepping stone. God in His infinite wisdom knows that we need to be properly prepared before we can step into the fullness of His promises. Think of a seed planted in the ground. When the seed is first sown, there is nothing visible above the surface. The seed must go through a process of growth beneath the soil. It needs water, sunlight, and time to develop roots before it can break through the surface and bear fruit. Similarly, when God plants a promise in our hearts, it doesn't immediately come to fruition. It must go through a process of development, growth, and maturity before we can fully receive it. And that process, often called waiting, is crucial. During the waiting period, many of us become impatient. We ask God, "Why is this taking so long?" We look around and see others getting what we want, and we wonder, when will it be my turn? It is in those moments of doubt and frustration that we need to remember that God is not withholding from us. He is preparing us. He is developing the strength, wisdom, and character we need to handle the blessing that is on its way. When we look at the story of the Israelites, we see a nation that went through a long period of waiting before receiving the promise of the land of Canaan. They were given a glimpse of the promised land, but it took 40 years of wandering in the wilderness before they could fully claim it. 40 years. That's a long time to wait, especially when the promise is so close and so real. Yet during those years in the wilderness, God was teaching the Israelites to trust Him, to depend on Him, and to follow His lead. They needed to be purified and refined in order to fully appreciate and receive the blessings that God had promised them. Without the waiting period, they wouldn't have been ready for the land flowing with milk and honey. In our own lives, the waiting process is not just about time passing, it is about us being transformed in the process. God is developing patience in us, strengthening our faith and deepening our relationship with Him. He is teaching us to trust in His timing, even when it doesn't align with our own. Waiting is a test of our character, our faith, and our willingness to surrender to God's will. When we wait on God, we are declaring that we believe He knows what is best for us. We are saying, "Lord, I trust that your timing is perfect, even when I don't understand it." This is why God's blessings often don't come immediately. If they did, we might miss the deeper lessons that God wants to teach us. If we receive everything we ask for without delay, we might not develop the character and the wisdom necessary to steward those blessings. When we wait, we learn humility, we learn patience, we learn to rely on God rather than our own understanding. And when the blessing finally comes, we are able to receive it with gratitude, wisdom, and the humility that comes from knowing that it was God's grace and not our own efforts that brought us to this place. There is a profound wisdom in waiting that we can only gain through experience. It is in the quiet, seemingly uneventful seasons of life that we are being shaped. And just like a sculptor who chips away at a block of marble to reveal the statue within, God is chipping away at our lives, removing the impurities, the pride, and the selfishness that would hinder us from fully receiving His blessing. Each moment of waiting is a moment of preparation for something greater. But waiting doesn't mean that we are inactive. It doesn't mean that we simply sit idly by and do nothing. While we wait, we must continue to grow, to serve, and to be faithful in what God has already given us. Just as the seed does not grow without the right conditions, we cannot grow without actively nurturing our faith, deepening our relationship with God, and pursuing the purpose He has set before us. Waiting requires action, but it's an action that is rooted in trust and patience. It's an action that says, I trust that God is doing something in me, even when I cannot see the full picture. The second part of the process is perhaps the most important, recognizing that you are in a season of divine preparation. It is so easy to become discouraged when we don't see immediate results, when we feel like our efforts aren't leading to anything tangible. We may even begin to question whether our dreams will ever come to fruition or if we are truly on the path God has called us to. But I want to remind you today that just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean God is not working. In fact, some of the most powerful moves of God are happening behind the scenes in ways we cannot yet comprehend. If we look at the life of David, we see a powerful example of divine preparation. David was anointed to be king of Israel as a young man, but he didn't step into that position immediately. He had to go through years of preparation. During this time, David wasn't sitting on the sidelines waiting for his turn to rule. No, he was serving God faithfully in the fields, protecting his father's sheep, and developing skills that would one day serve him well as king. He faced battles, challenges, and struggles, all of which were shaping him for the leadership role he was destined for. David didn't know that he was being prepared for the palace during the years he spent as a shepherd. He didn't know that every battle he fought, every challenge he overcame was a test that was refining him, building his faith and shaping his character, but he trusted in God's timing. He knew that God was with him even in the quiet seasons, even when no one was watching. And when the time came for David to step into his destiny, he was ready. His preparation had equipped him with the strength, courage, and wisdom he needed to lead the nation of Israel. In the same way, God is preparing you for your destiny. You may not see it right now, but everything you are going through is part of the process. Your struggles, your challenges, your moments of doubt, they are not wasted. They are the very things that God is using to prepare you for the blessing that is coming. The waiting is not a sign of delay. It is a sign of divine preparation. God knows what He is doing, and He is working in ways that you cannot yet see. Trust Him. Embrace the process. Understand that every step, every challenge, every moment of waiting is a part of the journey that will lead you to your destiny. The blessing is not just in the end result. It is in the process, the preparation, and the transformation that happens along the way. We are often blinded by the outward appearance of our circumstances. It is so easy to look at what we can see with our physical eyes and make assumptions about the outcome of our journey. When we find ourselves in difficult situations, we tend to focus on the obstacles and challenges that stand in our way. These challenges, however, are not always the full story. The difficulties that we face are often the very means by which God prepares us for the greater blessings He has in store for us. But in the moment of trial, it's hard to see beyond the storm. It feels like we are being defeated, but the truth is that the storm is actually revealing the strength within us, strength that we didn't even know we had. When the storm comes, it often feels like we're being torn apart. We may find ourselves asking, why am I going through this? What is the purpose of all this pain and struggle? Yet, it is in the midst of these trials that God is doing His most powerful work. The storm has a purpose. It is not sent to destroy us, but to shape us. It is meant to bring to the surface the hidden strengths and qualities that lie dormant within us. The Bible is full of stories of people who faced intense storms, but it was through these storms that they were refined, purified, and ultimately prepared for the blessings that God had promised them. Think of the story of Job. Job went through unimaginable suffering. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family. His friends mocked him, and he found himself at the end of his rope. It would have been easy for Job to give up and curse God in the face of all this loss. But through it all, Job chose to trust God. In the middle of his storm, he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job's faith was tested, but it was not broken. It was in the fire of affliction that Job's faith was refined. He came out of the storm stronger and with a deeper understanding of who God is. At the end of his journey, God restored everything that Job had lost and more. The storm didn't break Job. It revealed the depth of his faith and trust in God. This is the same truth we must embrace when we face our own storms. The struggles we face are not signs of our defeat. They are opportunities for God to reveal our strength and our resilience. It is in these moments that our faith is tested and refined. The storm does not have the power to destroy us. In fact, it is in the storm that we often find the greatest breakthroughs. When we stand firm in our faith, trusting that God is with us, we emerge from the storm stronger, wiser, and more prepared to receive the blessings that God has in store for us. When the winds of adversity blow against us, we must remember that they are not meant to harm us. They are meant to shape us. Just as gold is refined in the fire, our faith is purified in the trials we face. God is not interested in our comfort. He is interested in our character. He is more concerned with who we are becoming than with what we are going through. The storm is not an accident. It is part of the divine process that God is using to bring us into the fullness of His plan. And when we emerge from the storm, we will be stronger and better equipped to handle the blessings He has prepared for us. In our walk of faith, there comes a point when we must learn to let go of our control. We live in a world that prizes independence and self-sufficiency, and it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we can control every aspect of our lives. We want to determine the outcome, to dictate the timing, and to steer the course of our own journey. But God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is not our timing. One of the greatest tests we face is learning to surrender control to Him and trust that He knows what is best. Surrendering control is not an easy thing to do. It means relinquishing our desire to dictate the terms of our lives and instead trusting God to lead us. It means acknowledging that we don't have all the answers and that we are completely dependent on God's wisdom and guidance. But when we are able to let go and trust God fully, we position ourselves to receive the blessing that He has prepared for us. In the story of Abraham, we see the ultimate test of surrender. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet for years, Abraham and his wife Sarah remained childless. God's promise seemed impossible, and Abraham struggled with doubt and frustration. But despite the years of waiting and uncertainty, Abraham continued to trust God. And then came the ultimate test. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son Isaac, the son through whom the promise was to be fulfilled. Abraham's faith was tested to the limit. Would he trust God even when it seemed like the promise would be destroyed? Abraham chose to surrender. He was willing to give up everything, even the very promise he had waited so long for, because he trusted that God had a plan. Abraham's faith was refined. He learned that God's ways are higher than his own, and that God is faithful to fulfill His promises in His own time and in His own way. God spared Isaac, but Abraham had passed the test. He had surrendered control and placed his trust completely in God. As a result, God reaffirmed His promise to Abraham and made him the father of many nations. The lesson here is clear. Surrendering control is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. It is an act of faith and trust that acknowledges God's sovereignty over our lives. When we surrender, we are declaring that we trust God to do what we cannot do for ourselves. We are saying, God, I trust you with my life. I trust you with my future. I trust you with my dreams. And when we release control and trust God's timing, He can bring about blessings far greater than anything we could have imagined on our own. As we walk this journey of faith, we must remember that God's blessings are not just about the end result. They are about the process of becoming who He has called us to be. Every step we take, every challenge we face, every test we endure is shaping us for the destiny that God has in store. It is in the struggles, the waiting, the surrender, and the storms that we are being refined and prepared to receive the fullness of God's blessing. The process is just as important as the destination. Many of us want the blessings without the process, but the truth is that the process is what prepares us to handle the blessings. If we were to receive everything we wanted immediately, we might not be ready for it. We might squander it or be overwhelmed by it. But when we go through the process, when we trust God in the storm and surrender control, we become stronger, wiser, and more capable of handling the blessings that God has promised. So as you walk through your own journey of faith, remember that the process is not something to be feared or avoided. It is the very thing that God is using to shape you into the person He has called you to be. Embrace the challenges, the waiting, and the storms, knowing that God is with you every step of the way. And when the blessing comes, you will be ready to receive it with a heart full of gratitude and a life prepared to steward it for His glory. We often overlook the importance of personal growth during the journey to God's blessings. The allure of the end result, the moment when the blessings pour in, is so captivating that we forget the real value lies not in the destination, but in the transformation we undergo as we walk through the process. It's in the process that we are reshaped, refined, and made ready for what lies ahead. When we look at the heroes of faith in the Bible, we see that it was their character and faith that equipped them to carry the weight of the blessings they received. It wasn't their ability to achieve things on their own or their desire for comfort that brought them success. It was their willingness to grow, to change, and to trust God even when they didn't fully understand His plan. Consider the story of Joseph. He was a young dreamer with a promise from God, but his journey to the fulfillment of that promise was anything but easy. Joseph's journey began with betrayal from his brothers, who sold him into slavery. From that moment, he went through a series of trials, being falsely accused of a crime, being thrown into prison, and facing uncertainty about his future. Yet through every circumstance, Joseph remained faithful to God. His dreams did not come to fruition immediately. His faith was tested over and over again. But each trial served to build Joseph's character and strengthened his trust in God. Joseph was not the same man when he stood before Pharaoh, interpreting dreams and eventually being elevated to the second highest position in Egypt. The person who had been sold into slavery was now the man who had the wisdom and leadership to save entire nations from famine. He could not have stepped into that role without the personal growth and spiritual maturity that he had gained through his trials. Joseph's story reminds us that the trials we face are not random. They are the means by which God is shaping us for the great things He has planned for us. God wasn't just preparing Joseph for a position of power. He was preparing him to be a man of integrity, wisdom, and humility. He was molding Joseph into the person who could carry the weight of the blessings He would later bestow upon him. The trials Joseph faced did not define him, they refined him. Through each hardship, God was working on his character, teaching him the value of humility, patience, and trust. It is so easy to become consumed by our immediate desires, to focus solely on what we want and how quickly we want it. But the truth is that if we are not prepared for the blessings that God has for us, they can overwhelm us. If we receive the blessing before we are ready, it can be more of a burden than a gift. The process of growth is necessary because it equips us to handle the blessings in a way that will bring glory to God. Without personal growth, the blessing may slip through our fingers or lose its purpose. But with growth comes the strength to manage and appreciate what God has given us. It's important to note that growth doesn't happen without effort or discomfort. Personal growth requires us to step outside our comfort zones, to face challenges, and to wrestle with our own weaknesses. We will encounter situations that test our patience, our perseverance, and our faith. It's easy to wish for an easy, painless path, but the truth is that it is in the struggles that we discover our true strength. We learn to lean on God, to trust in His guidance, and to recognize that we are not in control of the outcome. Growth happens when we relinquish the need for control and allow God to work in our lives. It happens when we embrace the discomfort of change and allow God to shape us into the people He has destined us to be. One of the hardest things we must learn during our journey is the ability to walk by faith and not by sight. It is so easy to trust God when we see the path clearly ahead of us, when everything is going smoothly, and when the promise seems close. But what about when we can't see the way forward? What about when the road is uncertain, when we don't know where we're going or how we'll get there? It is in these moments that our faith is truly tested. When we cannot see the way, when we are unsure of the next step, will we still trust that God is leading us? Abraham's life is another example of walking by faith. When God called him to leave his home and go to a land that He would show him, Abraham didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what the future held, but he obeyed. Abraham didn't have a map or a detailed plan. He simply trusted God and stepped out in faith. He walked by faith, not by sight. And as a result, he became the father of many nations, just as God had promised. Abraham's journey teaches us that trusting God doesn't require a clear picture of the future. It only requires obedience and faith in His promises. God didn't give Abraham all the details up front, but He provided for him every step of the way. When we walk by faith, we are not walking in blind uncertainty. We are walking with the assurance that God is leading us, even if we cannot see the whole path ahead. The difficulty of walking by faith is that it often requires us to let go of our own plans and agendas. We may have a vision for our lives, a timeline for when we want things to happen, but God's plan often doesn't align with our own. He asks us to trust Him even when we don't understand. He asks us to surrender our timelines, our expectations, and our understanding of how things should unfold. It is in these moments of surrender that God's will becomes more clear. We may not understand the path, but as we trust God and move forward in obedience, He reveals more of the journey to us. One of the most difficult aspects of the journey is learning to wait for God's timing. Our society teaches us to be impatient. We live in a culture where instant gratification is the norm, where waiting is seen as an inconvenience. But in God's economy, timing is everything. His timing is perfect, and He knows when the time is right for the blessings to be revealed. Sometimes we find ourselves in a season of waiting, and it feels like nothing is happening. We pray, we work, we believe, but the breakthrough seems delayed. This is the testing ground of faith. Waiting is not a passive experience. It is a time of active trust. When we wait on God, we are not simply sitting idly by, hoping for things to change. We are trusting that God is at work, even when we cannot see it. We are continuing to believe that His promises will come to pass, even when the evidence around us doesn't seem to support that belief. Waiting requires patience, perseverance, and a deep sense of trust in God's goodness and faithfulness. The story of King David's rise to the throne provides an excellent illustration of the importance of waiting on God's timing. David was anointed to be king of Israel as a young man, but he didn't become king right away. He spent years in the wilderness, facing persecution, rejection, and hardship. Yet, during those years, God was preparing him to rule. David had to wait for God's timing to be fulfilled. He didn't rush ahead trying to seize the throne on his own terms. He trusted that when the time was right, God would place him in the position He had promised. And in God's perfect timing, David became king and led Israel to greatness. David's story teaches us that waiting is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of faith. It is in the waiting that God prepares us for the blessings ahead. During the waiting, God works in ways we cannot always see. He is aligning circumstances, opening doors, and preparing us for what's to come. We may not always understand why the waiting is necessary, but we must trust that God is at work behind the scenes. And when the time is right, He will bring us into the fullness of His promises. It is during the waiting that our faith grows, our patience is developed, and our trust in God's perfect timing is strengthened. Through all of this, it is important to understand that God's blessings are not just about the end result. They are about the transformation we undergo in the process. The trials, the waiting, the surrender, and the obedience are all part of the journey that prepares us to receive what God has promised. It is through these experiences that we become the people who can handle and appreciate the blessings God has in store for us.